everyone, and welcome back to Lynchian Picks on Coffee Nick's Movie Picks. This is a limited series venturing into the dreamlike world of David Lynch films and black, damn fine coffee. You are listening to part 7 of 10, and in this episode, we'll be getting lost in alternate realities as we discuss David Lynch's 1997 Lost Highway. Our black coffee pairing for today is the Straight Black from Headspace Coffee. Please take a seat, stay a while, and let's talk David Lynch over some coffee. Wow! Hello everyone! It has been quite a while since I've done one of these Lynchian Picks episodes, so I'm so sorry if you were patiently waiting for the next one and it just never came, but here we are. I said I would do it. Here it is. For those of you who are just joining, this is Lynchian Picks. This is like a sub-series to the main show, Coffee Nick's Movie Picks, where I discuss David Lynch's films one by one. These are by no means like explainer episodes. I'm not trying to crack the code on what his films mean. I'm simply sharing my thoughts on his films, my interpretations. I would love to hear yours as well. And basically, at the end of this series, I would love to explore what the through line is throughout his career. What are some things that all of these films have in common? Or like, what is that one thing that he was trying to share with us through his films? I started this series about a year ago in May of 2025, months after David Lynch passed away. I wanted to basically honor him with this series and discuss these really great films. He is, as you know, one of my favorite directors, and I bring him up in like every single episode of this show. So it was just inevitable that this series happened. But this operates sort of like the Dollython or Gretathon episodes, where they are just supplementary to the main episodes, the main channel. Before, this was like a Patreon series, but that wasn't really working out. That did not go how I wanted it to. So this is just now going to be on the main channel. As I mentioned earlier, this is part 7 of 10 of the Lynchian Picks series. So there's 6 of these episodes already out. There's even some bonus episodes. Those are available on the main channel. You may hear me mention like the Patreon or like the Coffee House or whatever, but just ignore that. That's not a thing anymore. So just enjoy those episodes. Go back and listen. They're all on the main channel. And since this is like an already established series, this is going to stay consistent with some of my older episodes where they're more serious, they're more researched, they're more thought out. I'm going to write like little descriptions. I'm going to write like a little official review at the end that I'm going to read. So it's a little different than some of my current episodes, but I hope you enjoy. I'm very happy to be back talking about one of my favorite directors of all time. Let's get into it, shall we? So, Now Brewing. This is a segment reviewing coffee as black as midnight on a moonless night. Yeah, only black coffee in this series because David Lynch loved black coffee, so we're gonna stick with that too. And today I'm reviewing the Straight Black from Headspace Coffee. A little bit about Headspace Coffee. This is a retail coffee brand that uses organic adaptogenic mushrooms like ashwagandha, lion's mane, and collagen to help you stay calm, clear, and centered. You heard that right. They use mushrooms in their coffee. And these are not like magic mushrooms. These are not psychedelic, but they just have whatever effects on your brain, positive effects on your brain, I guess. Adaptogenic. I don't really know what that means. I have the can right here though, so I'm going to read a little bit from that. And I say retail coffee brand, meaning it's like an online shop, and then some stores sell these cans in their store. I went to Streets Market on 14th Street in DC, and they have these. They also have all sorts of other flavors. They have like matcha, they have a mocha, they have a cappuccino flavor, which I have a bone to pick with cappuccino flavor because that doesn't really mean anything. A cappuccino has to do with the foam. So whenever someone says cappuccino flavor, it's usually like a sugary coffee milk taste. That's not what a cappuccino is really. So I have a bone to pick with that. That's not like true coffee stuff, you know? But anyways, no disrespect to Headspace Coffee over here. Specifically, Headspace's products pride themselves in providing a sustained energy, which means it's free of that usual coffee jitters you get or caffeine crashing. There's no sort of like coffee anxiety. This provides just a sense of relief and cognitive enhancement, which I did experience when I had that. And I'll unpack that a little bit, my experience with this a little bit more later. Like I said, you can find this in Streets Market. They have all sorts of different flavors, so check it out. A little bit about this straight black, of course. This is a cold brew with organic lion's mane, ashwagandha, and reishi, which I have no idea what those mushrooms mean. I know a mushroom person. I could have them on the podcast to explain like the benefits of each of those, but I didn't think to do that. But it has that in here. Talking specifically about the coffee side of things, I taste some notes of cocoa and stone fruit, which was kind of nice. I was just kind of expecting like basic canned cold brew taste, like nothing really special, but this did have notes and it was quite nice. It was also foamed pretty nicely. When you crack it open, it's almost like it's, I don't know, pressurized because it had a natural layer of crema that came out, like cream at the top that was really nice. And that's unique for a canned coffee. Not many really can achieve that. And it just had like a fresh taste that I was not expecting. So, aside from having these weird health benefits and having like mushrooms in it, you really don't taste that at all. It just really tasted like a high quality can of cold brew, which was really nice. A little bit about my experience with this. I was really scared to drink this because I mistook ashwagandha for ayahuasca. And if you know ayahuasca, it's like known to be this like psychedelic drug. If you've seen the movie Queer, that's like the only stuff I know about ayahuasca, which I don't know if that's a fair representation of that drug. I don't know how else to put it. That's psychedelic. I thought that that was in this, and it's not that hey, I'm not saying whether or not I endorse doing that or not, but I got that because they were selling it at a store. So I was like, okay, so this, it's harmless. It's not a drug or anything. They're selling it in the store. I don't need an ID to buy this, anything like that. I know lion's mane is like, that's a normal thing that people do. My dad talks to me about like the benefits of like mushrooms like that. Again, whenever I say mushrooms here, I'm not talking about psychedelic mushrooms. I'm not talking about magic mushrooms. I'm talking about like ones that are legal. But I was scared to try this because I was like, oh my gosh, what effect is this going to have on me? Like, what is this going to do to me? Am I going to be like, I don't know, like dizzy, or how will it clash with like, I don't know, my meals that day or something. I just did not know what to expect. I was like, am I going to be like feral and crazy? I didn't know. So it was actually my last day at my last job. I changed jobs recently. It was my last day. And I was like it was a mix of being stressed out, like I had a lot of work to do, and also I didn't care anymore. I was like, it's my last day, like very senioritis. So I was like, okay, I have so much to do, so much that I want to do to wrap things up, but also like, what happens, happens. It's my last day. So I was like, okay, let's try this. Who knows? Like, I know it's supposed to make you focused and everything. I was like, maybe I need this. And oh my God, when I tell you, I was like glued in, tuned in, locked in, plugged to my work. It was like a level of focused I have never experienced before. It was not just like caffeine, like energy. It was like focus, which I don't know. It was such a weird feeling. Like I've never felt like brain fog cleared away. It was just, I was in like a bubble. I was in a trance, just like really plowing out work. By the end of the day, I was like, hey guys, so like I have, I don't know, these podcasts planned out to May. Like I was able to like edit like 5 clips of the episode, a full episode, then the different parts of the, I was like, hey, planned out towards May. Don't have to worry about anything until then. And I was like, I don't know, like what came over me. I told them I like tried this mushroom coffee. I wasn't sure what it would do, and it like, I don't know, really changed my life. It was crazy, and much like I said earlier, there was no harsh come down. Like, of course, I get caffeine crashes every day around 2 or 3, and that's when I have another cup of coffee. And then the next caffeine crash is when I am supposed to be going to bed. So it works out perfectly. But with this, there was no caffeine crash. It was just like, I slowly left the bubble and resumed my normal activities. It was really, really nice. Okay, now that we have our coffee out, I would like to have my coffee thought. And this is an outlet dedicated to voice my incoherent thoughts over a cup of coffee. We have passed the point of no return when it comes to QR codes. Everywhere you go, you see them, you scan them. I can't even name all the places that, in order to participate in whatever activity or eat whatever meal, you have to now scan a QR code. I feel like this started in other ways. The Ziosk at Olive Garden, you pay with the screen at your table. You can order with that screen at your table. Delta Work, who hosts the Very Delta podcast, said, "Fuck that. Do you want me to just clock in?" Exactly. Exactly. I don't know if this is an extreme take, but whatever happened to just handing a menu and a check to the table? No, I do not want to close my tab on my phone. I do not want to look at a menu on my phone because, you know, God forbid I want to go to a nice dinner and I want to have nice conversation with the person across from me, and I want it to be a screenless, phoneless environment. We sit down at the table, we want to peruse our options, and right away it's, oh, we have to pull out our phones and look. And all of a sudden, someone may get distracted and like look at their text or an Instagram feed while the other person is still deciding. And already, like right away, before the dinner even starts, it's interrupted by screens. I don't love that. And it is just another way that we are delegating interactions with real human beings to interactions with our phone. It is just another, QR codes are just another way that we are being pushed from human interaction to increased interaction with our phone. It is already bad enough. I recently have come across, not recently, this has been a part of my life for a while now, but the most ridiculous use of QR codes I have seen to this day, and that is at the Alamo Drafthouse. And as you know, the official movie theater of this podcast is the Alamo Drafthouse. That is where I see all movies pretty much. I am a season pass, all in member, whatever the highest rank is, whatever it is, I am that. I love the Alamo Drafthouse. I love that they show old movies, yada, yada, yada. I love that they have been somewhat protecting the movie going experience and trying to make it like an undisturbed place. But recently, there has been a lot of headlines I'm seeing about that where that might be changing. Alamo, get it together. We liked you before. You don't do anything crazy. Come on. But they're not doing that at my location. So I really don't know what exactly is happening. I can't form an opinion on it yet because I have not been in one of those theaters where it's going crazy. But at my theater, before the movie starts, during the trailers, you order using a QR code that's at your table. You no longer have to write it down and put it up and press the button. You only do that during the movie. During the trailers and the pre-show, scan the QR code, place your order, open your tab. And, like I said, that's kind of like what the standard is becoming at every restaurant or establishment, unfortunately. Please tell me how that makes sense in a darkened room. How am I supposed to scan a QR code when it is near pitch black? The only times I have managed to do it is if the trailer has like a very bright scene in it and it lights up the theater for like 2 seconds and I could like get a quick scan. Tell me, how am I supposed to scan a QR code in a movie theater? Make that make sense. And why are we even pulling out our phones in movie theaters? I'm so sorry. I just don't understand. And the way I understand it, I've heard that other locations are testing this program where like if someone is being noisy, you pull out your phone or using their phone, you pull out your phone to scan the QR code to report that table. How does that fucking make sense? You pull out your phone to report someone for using their phone. You cause a disturbance to report a disturbance. And again, how are we scanning a QR code in a dark theater? It's already bad at Alamo because you have those people that will turn on their flashlight to the brightest setting to look at the menu. And that's fine because people have eyesight problems. Some people have a hard time seeing in any dimly lit room. Some of the theaters even have the lights under the table, and that's not enough. They need a brighter light. I get that. I get it. Some of the theaters don't even have that light under the table, which I don't understand why. Um, so it's already bad enough. Why are we making it worse? Why are we pushing people to be on their phones more, especially in a movie theater? I don't understand. Why are we using QR codes in a dark room? It does not make sense to me. It does not. If you have listened to this podcast for a long time, you know I am someone that has toyed with the idea of purchasing a dumb phone, which, if you don't know, that is basically a very basic phone. All it does is text and make phone calls. And, it would be supplemental to my smartphone, but it means I could leave the house and still, text and receive calls without like all of this stuff on a smartphone coming with me as I leave. And it just is so not practical to do that, or it feels not practical to do that because everywhere you go, there's these QR codes. And if I have a dumb phone, I just like, it would be so much harder to place an order at the draft house, or I couldn't even use my season pass because I emailed them and I was like, hey, if I don't have a smartphone, can I use my season pass? They said no. So it would just be hard to do things like that. I don't know how I would. I mean, I would have to have like a backup smartphone with me, but then it's like, why? I don't know. Why have a dumb phone? And I think about things like the Apple Wallet. I have the Apple credit card and I really like its benefits and everything, but you have to have a smartphone to get full benefits. You have to use Apple Pay to get full benefits. Maybe some dumb phones like have Apple Pay technology, but I'd be missing out on stuff like that. And there's so many other perks and stuff that conveniences, I guess, that you just don't get. Yeah, I guess that's the point. We've gotten so used to like convenience in our life via smartphones. And it just makes us more attached to those devices because we don't want those conveniences stripped away. So yeah, I'm smartphone pilled. I'll say it. I'll be the first to admit it. And in a sense, I'm QR code pilled, but I'm slowly starting to become self-aware and question why we are doing what we're doing. I invite you to do the same with me. Okay, now that I made things weird, let's talk about the movie, because it's about to get weird anyways for this movie. Now showing is part 7 of Lynchian Picks, and this is our film discussion segment diving deep into the dreamlike nightmares of David Lynch. In this part, we are discussing Lost Highway. Mysterious videotapes arrive at a jazz musician's doorstep that foretell him being convicted of murder. In another, different place, a mechanic and a gangster's girlfriend engage in a dangerous love affair. Lost Highway is directed by David Lynch. It stars Bill Pullman, Patricia Arquette, and John Roselius. It was originally released in theaters on February 18th, 1997. Okay, wow. We are getting to the point in Lynchian Picks where it is like discussing these movies is kind of inconceivable. It is like, what do we even discuss here? That we're getting to the point where it is like, okay, plot and like a narrative that makes sense, that is now taking a back seat. From here on out, it is going to get very bonkers, I think. This is co-written by Barry Gifford, which I think is interesting. In part 5, we discussed Wild at Heart. Barry Gifford wrote the book and I guess co-wrote that as well. For that Wild at Heart is based off of. He also wrote the book that inspired this film to be written, and David Lynch approached Barry Gifford and requested that he write this film with David Lynch. This was financed by French company Sibi 2000 and Lynch's own company. This is following the disaster of Twin Peaks Fire Walk with Me. This was shortly after that, or not shortly, I guess, but a few years after that. And really at this point in time, Lynch was more popular abroad in countries like France than he was in America. So it makes sense that a French company took a chance with this film rather than an American one. And Lynch describes this film as a psychogenic fugue rather than a conventionally logical story. And I feel like that is actually a really accurate quote. I feel like that for someone who like does not explain their movies and gives you sort of no indication or clue of what to expect, I think that a psychogenic fugue describes this movie so well. And if you're wondering what like a psychogenic fugue is, I read like a little description of it, and it basically is like a loss of identity, and it's confusion as to who a person, like who you are. If someone like is confused what their identity is, who they are, where they are, it is like that feeling or that sort of sensation, and it's that adapted into a film. So, the story of how this film was made, a majority of the script was written in 1 month, and the idea of the film originally came from just the words Lost Highway. David Lynch was reading Barry Gifford's book titled Night People, and he read the words Lost Highway, and it inspired him to create a story based on those words. Like I said, Lynch had previously adapted Gifford's book, Wild at Heart, and he invited Gifford to co write this film with him. And the film was partially inspired by the murder trial of O.J. Simpson and how Simpson was able to return to his normal life shortly after the murder trial occurred, and the alleged murder occurred. Was he proven guilty? I don't know. I don't know. But it was inspired by that, and you can really tell because it's sort of about, to me, the dissociation that comes with like a murder, I guess, or how someone like dreams of a murder in order to escape a reality, or escapes a reality by murdering someone. It's very, very interesting, especially in the context of like a relationship or marriage or love or something like that. This film is also inspired by something that actually happened to David Lynch. The idea of someone leaving the message, Dick Laurent is dead, was inspired by Lynch's own experience of someone leaving that message at his home randomly without context. And that really like chilled David Lynch to the bone. He was like, who is Dick Laurent? Do I know him? Like, is there another version of me that knows this man? Is someone leaving this message from the future? Blah, 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 blah. But David Lynch ultimately assumed it was a message meant for his neighbor, David Lander, which I think is very interesting. And the documentary Lynch slash Oz actually explains a lot about this movie, as well as all the other Lynch films, but it really focuses on this movie in a way that made me appreciate it a lot more. So if you want to kind of learn more about this movie or like that story specifically or the inspirations behind this, I highly recommend that documentary. It's really well made, and I will probably review that at some point on this series as like a little bonus episode or something. Another really important part about this movie is the score. That is like what this movie is best known for, I think. But Angelo Badalamenti, who is David Lynch's longtime collaborator when it comes to soundtracks, he scored the film along with Barry Adamson. And the soundtrack was produced by the Nine Inch Nails frontman Trent Reznor, which is awesome. You can really tell when you watch this movie too, the Nine Inch Nails ification of it all, which is really cool. And it also features selected songs by David Bowie, Lou Reed, and Rammstein, as well as new recordings from Nine Inch Nails, Marilyn Manson, and the Smashing Pumpkins. Very, very 90s movie over here. The soundtrack is like an element that is in the foreground here, and a lot of very intense moments are scored so heavily, or there's like this random needle drop of like the Smashing Pumpkins or Nine Inch Nails, and it's like a very tragic moment, and then it has like intense rock music coming in. And actually, for me, I think that is one element of the film that does not work too well. I feel like the needle drops almost take me out of what would otherwise be a very like uh impactful experience, or an experience that I'm like very deep into. Kind of takes me out of it. I'm like, oh, that's kind of jarring, or that's not exactly the song I would have picked. And maybe, hey, maybe that means something. Maybe that's to play along with like the dissociation of the story. You yourself are being dissociated from the story when like this crazy music comes in out of nowhere. But for me, it just doesn't work. It doesn't lend itself to this film's experience. But for other people, that is their favorite part about this movie. It really works for others. And I get it. I get it. But for me, not so much. One really cool fact that I love about Lost Highway is that part of the film was shot in David Lynch's own home. It If you've seen this movie, you know that it is very clearly separated into two parts, kind of like two and a half, I guess. There's like an epilogue part where things come together. But the first part, there is a set of characters in a house. The second part, there is a set of characters kind of working out of an auto shop and running away from an auto shop. The first part in the house, that is David Lynch's own home. And parts of the home were constructed to lend itself to this movie, to like making certain shots work. There are like really interesting shots that happen in a bedroom where like it zooms out way high above the bed, almost looking like the ceiling is like 50 feet tall. There's some shots in like this walk-in wardrobe where it like looks like pitch black inside the wardrobe and you see like shadows moving around. Those parts of the film to me are the most terrifying. This house is horrifying. Makes sense that David Lynch lives there, but it is like a really unique Hollywood house. Like it makes sense that it's a house that you would only ever see like in the Hollywood Hills by the Griffith Observatory, you know? Um, and it kind of plays on that well. The first part of the story is very like LA coded. They're going to like Hollywood parties and they're both very well-known people for one reason or another. So yeah, I think that lends itself very well. The house lends itself very well to that. This film was originally meant to be 180 minutes, and to that I say, yikes. This film is already way longer than it needs to be. It helps that it's broken up into like two parts, so it's like kind of like 50 minutes, 50 minutes, and then like a 20-minute epilogue. But 180 minutes would just have been crazy, I think. So even the French producers were like, "Hey, you got to cut this down," which is really funny. And we get the crazy long movie with Inland Empire, so we don't need more than that. Um, I think everything is in this film that needs to be in it. I don't think this film would have been any more clear or made any more sense if it was any longer than it is now. Okay, getting into this movie a little bit, I love the first part. I love the part that happens in the house. It is so quiet and eerie and intimidating. And you really feel like you are there with this couple in the house. So it centers around the two characters. I don't know who the man is, but Patricia Arquette is the woman, and the man, who's named Fred, is a jazz musician. And his character is kind of like a interesting person, maybe a bad person, I don't know. And Patricia Arquette's character is very stone cold, and we actually don't learn much about her in this sequence. Something really interesting that Fred says is that he has kind of like a disdain for video cameras because he, quote, likes to remember things his own ways, how I remember them and not necessarily how they happened, end quote. And I think it's very interesting that a jazz musician has a disdain for video cameras. I don't know much about jazz. I should have Reese on this episode, I think. But I think, if I might be wrong, but the point of jazz music is that it's not necessarily structured or written down. It's all about like the feelings you get while you're playing and like just kind of going with the flow. Again, horrible definition, and I might be wrong, but that's my interpretation. So it's really interesting that his career and his ideals mesh up like that. And video cameras play such an important part later in this film. The quote unquote villain of the movie is just this mysterious man that shows up with the video camera up to his eye. And he approaches Fred at a party and says, "We know each other, don't we?" And he says, "I'm in your house right now. Call the house and I'll be there." And he's presumably like the man that's sending these videotapes to Fred and what is Patricia Arquette's character's name? Renee, yes. So really interesting stuff about like viewership happening here and also like reality and does filming something make it reality or does experiencing it Does that make it reality? What is reality? What is real? What can we believe? Because we see on videotape things that never happened, but also like we see things in reality that also might not have ever happened. So it's like, what do you believe? Really interesting. And this whole first half is just very, very cold. I don't know how else to describe it. It's very cold, bone chilling. There is almost no score happening, or at least it's very minimal. The way the characters interact with each other is very cold. The dialogue is very short. There's not much emotion, and there's a lot of sex in this first half between Fred and Renee. And even the sex is very, very dreadful. If you've seen Twin Peaks The Return, there's a sex scene between a character who we can presume to be Cooper and a character who we can presume to be Diane. If you know, you know. But there's a sex scene in the last episode between those two that is horrifying, and it's really dreadful and weird. And their like hands are covering their faces. It's very, very weird. And you can see kind of like the seeds of those ideas being planted in Lost Highway. There is a lot of sex like that where it feels very wrong to watch. You feel like you are, intruding on these characters, but you also feel like something wrong is happening between these characters themselves. So we later find out that these videotapes that are being anonymously sent to Fred's house are actually recording him murdering Renee, his wife. Fred is then just abruptly arrested, sent to death row, and in his jail cell, he becomes a completely different person. He doesn't necessarily swap realities. He's not in like an alternate dimension. He just becomes a completely different person. He turns into a man named Peter or Pete, who just is in his jail cell, and he's let go. And he goes back to his job, his everyday job at the mechanic shop. And he doesn't really have a recollection of anything before when he was in the jail cell. There's FBI people following him, trying to understand what happened, how he got in that jail cell, and what happened to Fred. But at his auto shop, he seems to be known by this mob boss who is called Mr. Eddie. Mr. Eddie really likes the work that Pete does on his car. And at this point, it just kind of turns into like a very Tarantino-esque film with like crime and everything. There's a scene where Mr. Eddie takes Pete into his car and they're driving through like the Hollywood Hills, and there's this guy tailgating Mr. Eddie's car, and Mr. Eddie like veers him off the road and gets out and like slaps him around with his big pistol. And there's so many like crazy quotes that happen here. I think this is, what is it? Smoother than shit out of a duck's ass. I think that's where this quote comes from. And Mr. Eddie, the actor that plays him, is just spectacular and acts so over the top in the best ways. And there's like a lot of comedy that happens in this second half of the film. That's another point I want to bring up. It's almost like two completely different films happening here. The dialogue in the second half is completely different. It's a lot more extensive, and the characters are kind of more warm and have a sense of humor almost. Kind of like how the characters acted in Blue Velvet or Twin Peaks. It doesn't really have that coldness like in Mulholland Drive or Inland Empire that the first half of this film has. And it's even shot differently. There's warmer colors here. There's actual like sunlight. It doesn't feel like we're in this cave of a house all the time. And there's music. This is where we get a lot of the needle drops, a lot of the Angelo Badalamenti tune coming in. So I really like that. You almost get this feeling of dissociation yourself as an audience member where you're like, am I even watching the same movie? It's kind of putting you right in the shoes of Fred / Pete, whoever this character is. We are quickly introduced to a new character who's also played by Patricia Arquette, but this character's name is Alice. You can see I'm flipping through pages here. I have all my different notes and everything. Alice is Mr. Eddie's girl. I don't think it's Mr. Eddie's wife, but she just is kind of following Mr. Eddie around. And we can tell that she is in some way loyal to Mr. Eddie. But Alice and Pete sort of immediately have a spark. They have this very intense passion for one another. And they start this dangerous love affair. And Mr. Eddie at the same time starts mentioning to Pete, like, if someone ever touched my girl, I think he says, shove my pistol so far up their ass that I blow their brains out. Like, it's so intimidating. And at the same time, Mr. Eddie also approaches Pete and starts sexualizing him very strangely in an intimidating way. He'll come up to Pete and say, this is a direct quote that I wrote down. You like pornos? They give you a boner? So strange. And again, the detectives are also following Peter at this time, trying to see like what exactly is going on with this man who mysteriously appeared at this death row prison. And they follow Peter while he has this love affair with Alice. And another quote that the detectives have, they say, quote, the fucker gets more pussy than a toilet seat, end quote. David Lynch, the man you are, writing these crazy quotes. I think that this movie might have the best quotes out of any Lynch film. It's really funny. It's great. And yeah, so they have this, like, Alice and Peter have this really sort of intense, dangerous love affair because Mr. Eddie he starts suspecting that this is happening. There's also this weird scene where Peter and Alex are having sex in a motel or something, and on the radio, jazz music comes on. And it's not just jazz music, it's the jazz music we hear Fred playing at the start of the film. In this very intense montage that like has like intense music and flashing lights, very true to like Lynch's style. And when the music comes on the radio, Peter has like this strong aversion to it. And he's like, oh, turn that off, turn that off, turn that off. And he can't explain why. He is very averted to jazz music and he doesn't know why, much like Fred had this strong aversion to video cameras. Very interesting. There's also like a lot of noir elements to this film that I love, love, love. There's shots where Patricia Arquette's character is talking on the telephone. And I feel like if you know anything about this movie, those are the shots from the film that you have seen. It's very intense lighting on the bottom half of her face with bright lipstick. And she has the phone and she's like whispering into the phone very quietly. And it's very ominous and intimidating. And this is when Mr. Eddie starts to really be hot on their tail. And there's also a scene with Patricia Arquette's floating head, which I just really loved. It's very cool camera work. And it is also at this point in the film that the detectives recognize Mr. Eddie as Dick Laurent. So from the beginning of the film, when Fred gets the message, Dick Laurent is dead, that's supposedly Mr. Eddie. Okay. It just gets really crazy from this point. So, like I said, Mr. Eddie is hot on their tails, and Peter and Alice decide to run away and leave so they can escape and have this love affair in private. So, Alice comes up with this very elaborate plot. It's almost too elaborate, where she's like, at 10 p.m., show up at this house, break in through the back door, go up to the kitchen. It's on the third floor, turn the corner, and I'll be there. Pour a bottle of wine at the bottom. It's like so elaborate. It's almost like, wait, something wrong is happening. But of course, Peter just falls for it. We also start to learn a little bit more about what happened to Peter that night where he disappeared. Actually, we don't learn more about that. It just is shown, and it's very disturbing. And Peter's girlfriend, I think her name is Sheila, something very weird is happening with her. And Peter's parents seem to be very disturbed by what happened to Peter that night. His parents are also so funny. They're both like bikers. And that's just kind of like unexplained. And the murder, we also get glimpses of the murder once again, as they're kind of like touching on what happened to Peter that night. And I thought it was interesting that the murder is only shown through like video film. Like we get that digitized, like staticky look. And I think it's interesting. It reminds me of Nope a little bit, where the trauma is only shown through a mediated lens. Like there has to be some degree of separation. Like the traumatic incident can only be thought of through the lens of a video camera. It can't be thought of in real world terms. Like this character has had to separate it so much so that it's just a videotape at this point. I think that's really interesting. We learned that the video man, the mysterious video man, is friends with Mr. Eddie. That's a friendship for the ages. I'd like to queen out with those two. They both seem fun, and we learn at the end that the video man, maybe he's a good guy. I don't know. That's up for interpretation. Dick Laurent is also like a very Lynch character where he's a crime boss who like does all these horrible things, but he also like has a weird sense of morals. And he reminds me of the Las Vegas crime bosses from Twin Peaks The Return, where they were like, yeah, crime bosses doing bad things, but they also like had a heart. And like, I don't know, they had like, old American morals. Just very like Lynch touches to it. So Peter, of course, follows through with these plans that Alice made, and he goes to this mansion and he walks in, and there is huge on this projection screen, there is porn playing, and it shows Alice being having sex with this mysterious man. And there is this horrifying, ominous music playing. It's like domino be domino pa ta pa he ta ha, like satanic music. I don't know. It's horror. This is the scariest part of the movie, one of the scariest moments in Lynch's career. And we also just get this very, I described it as like Tarantino moment, where there's just this gruesome accidental murder that happens. And this house that they're breaking into, the guy shows up and Peter kind of just like beats him with like a club or something. And it like knocks him out. But then Alice comes down. She's like, oh yeah, you did it. The guy gets up, tries to take a swing at Peter again. Peter just steps out of the way, and the guy slips on the rug and bashes his head into the glass coffee table. I'm not just saying bashes into it, like his head slides into it, and it almost like cuts the top of his head off. And he's just stuck there. And both characters are just kind of like, fuck. Like, what just happened? It reminds me of like Once Upon a Time in Hollywood and stuff like that. This is also the moment in Lynch's career where he was compared a lot to Quentin Tarantino. And they kind of had like this feud that continued up until Inland Empire. And Inland Empire is when Lynch was kind of like, fuck you. I don't care about filming my movies on film. I will do it on a shitty video camera that anyone has access to. And I think Tarantino made this sly comment that was like, the point of films is to be shot on film. If you've listened to this podcast before, you know that I fucking hate Quentin Tarantino. I think he's a loser. He can make a good movie. Yeah, sure. But yeah, it does have, I will admit that Tarantino kind of has his own trademarks when it comes to his movies, of course. And there are a few of those. I think there definitely are comparisons you can make between Lost Highway and some of Tarantino's films. So this image of Alice that Peter has is distorted. He sort of saw Alice as a woman that he could have all to himself. To Peter, Alice was a woman that he had to himself in hotel rooms, secretly behind closed doors. And he thought of her in this pure light, and seeing her in pornos, in pornographic movies, distorted his image of her. And from that point on, Alice becomes almost a dreadful image to Peter. And he even sees an image of Alice and Renee with Mr. Eddie in this house. And he asks Alice, like, who is this other lady? And she doesn't really say anything about the other lady. She just says, oh, yeah, that's me right there. And funny enough, one of them is blonde, one of them is brunette, which is a recurring theme throughout many, many, many of Lynch's films, is the blonde versus the brunette, and like which one is the fantasy and which one is the reality. Alice is blonde. She is kind of like this fantasy version for Peter, but also Fred. And then Renee is the one in reality. She's the one kind of subjected to whatever real horror there is, this murder. She's the one that has to experience that, where Alice is this vision that gets to live in Peter's reality. But when Peter realizes that Alice is not real, or Alice is not exactly this pure, and again, I'm not saying that being in a pornographic movie makes someone unpure, but if we're basing it on like what this character's morals are, she is not who she says she is. Basically, that's the fantasy is interrupted, and that's when the dream, this other reality, starts to fall apart and crumble in on itself. Peter and Alice, they go on the lost highway, I guess you could call it, and they go to this house where they plan on escaping, and it's not at all what they thought it was, and it's kind of like this shack in the middle of the desert. Again, the dream is folding in on itself. This is not the runaway fantasy that Peter was having, and it's at this point that Peter goes back to being Fred. The actors change, and you now see Fred. And it's at this point Alice has a really impactful quote. Peter, or Fred, says to her, "I want you, Alice." And then really viciously and dramatically, this part was scary too. Alice says in this very, very malicious tone, "You'll never have me." And she kind of like draws it out. I really love that line delivery. And they go to the Lost Highway Motel. And there's like this really, again, like images of like really, oh, I think this is playing like at the house. We switch back to seeing what's at the house. I think detectives show up there, and we see the porn is still playing on the screen, but instead it's almost like snuff movie stuff, like really demonic stuff, like people being beat and all that. And we now focus on the picture that had Renee and Alice on it, and it only has Renee now. Alice disappears. She's no longer a person. The fantasy is gone. So Renee was always the one with Dick Laurent and Mr. Eddie, whoever they were. And basically Alice was this, in my interpretation, Alice was this person that Fred conjured up to be with her. I think maybe Fred discovered that Renee had this history with all of these people in these movies, and he created this fantasy version, or he murdered Renee and created this fantasy version of her. But not even in a fantasy could Fred have her. It's so interesting. I think this is really well done. And the motel scene is just insane. I don't even know how to describe it, but this is where the fantasy really just falls apart. And in the end, I think what happens, the video man comes back and kind of like kills, who does he kill? He kills someone with Fred. I'm forgetting. I watched this movie like 2 days ago, but instead of being like the villain, he is now working hand in hand with Fred. Fred goes back to his house and he delivers the message that Dick Laurent is dead. He delivers the message to himself from the past, maybe, and then he drives away down the Hollywood Hills, and that is the end of the movie. And I want to read Patricia Arquette's interpretation, because for me it feels very true, and I agree with a lot of what she said. She said, quote, "To me, it's a sort of movie about looking at women through the eyes of a misogynist. So he's totally obsessed with her," meaning Renee or Alice, "can't love her enough, can't have her to himself enough, can't kill her enough times." And she later elaborated that, quote, "He hates women. He doesn't quite trust Renee, even though she is his wife. He kills her, but can't remember it. Then he recreates himself as this viral young man and meets her again. And now she actually wants to fuck him, and she is in love with him. But even in this version, she is a dirty whore." Her words. "In this man's mind, a woman is always the monster, no matter what." End quote. You know, Patricia Arquette plays Alice and Renee. She's the only character to play multiple roles here. Even Fred kind of has this fantasy version of himself, because I feel like Renee, she doesn't really change characters. She just kind of changes images. She becomes like this blonde, innocent, wholesome version, or this fantasy version. She doesn't become a whole different person. It's instead like the man changing himself to like, meet this reality where he can have this woman and have her all to himself. And I think that this film touches on this weird misogynistic sensation where men feel very jealous of knowing the sexual histories of women who they're partners with, and not even women, like if men are with other men and they learn of like that other man's sexual history, it causes like this weird unexplainable jealousy for that man where it's like, oh, I can't believe they have a sexual history, that's not me. um me as a man living under the patriarchy, I've experienced that. um it's a very interesting sensation where it's like, oh my gosh, someone has had like a romantic history that like I wasn't a part of, and you feel like this bitterness towards it. And I think this movie takes that idea and kind of blows it up to 1000 and like makes it into this huge murder plot where all this dissociation is happening. One more thing I want to talk about in this movie is the naming. A lot of times I feel like names are not important in David Lynch films. It's more so about like maybe costumes or visuals or like Wizard of Oz motifs. But some really interesting names I kind of found in this version that I want to note is Peter and Alice. If you think about classic Disney movies that David Lynch grew up with, Alice in Wonderland and Peter Pan. Those are both stories about people escaping to different fantasies. Alice falls down a rabbit hole. She's blonde. She falls down a rabbit hole and is kind of in like this fucked up reality that she can't wake up from. And then Peter is sort of about a boy who could never grow up and who has this island all to himself. Um, yeah, and lives in this dream world that he never wants to leave and never wants to come to terms with. So I thought I feel like that's intentional. I don't want to think that's coincidental. Maybe it is, but I think that's a nice touch. Something that I didn't quite notice the first time I watched this. The first time I watched this, I hated it. I did not like this movie. This time around, though, I really enjoyed it so much more. So if this is your first time watching it, you didn't like it that much, I invite you to go back and enjoy this movie again because I think it makes a lot more sense the second time. Even if it is a long gap between viewing, I think you just kind of know how to approach this and what to expect. I really enjoyed this movie. I think it is horrifying as well as funny, as well as very impactful and bone chilling. It definitely like dissociates you, and it has like all of those Lynch flares that you would want. The performances are also wonderful. The man who plays Dick Laurent slash Mr. Eddie is great. The video man is horrifying. Like you will have nightmares about him. And Patricia Arquette is really the star of the show for me. She is just wonderful, wonderful. And she plays two separate characters so well. She just like goes into the David Lynch Hall of Fame of like these female actors who like have to play all of these extremely different roles. You know, Naomi Watts, Cheryl Lee, Laura Dern. Just, you know, put her with all of them, like just really had to jump through hoops for this performance and put her body through hoops for this. I really liked this time around. I even wrote down that I would give this a Nick mix. But talking about it, I realized like how cool these ideas were and how much they worked for me this time around. And how much this movie is about like dissociation and kind of like this evil man escaping like this crime, this murder he committed on his wife, and how he created this false reality. It's just brilliant. This is a brilliant movie, and there's just so many fun things about it, like the score, the comedy, the opening half, and oh my God, this movie was made into an opera, which I forgot to mention. This movie, this was adapted into an opera. Where did I have this written? Yes. Oh, yeah. I forgot this whole little note I made. This had mixed reviews upon release, of course. A lot of critics cited this film as incoherent, which yeah, it was a box office failure, grossing $3.8 million off of a budget of $15 million. But later, of course, the film garnered a cult following, and it made a lot of money back. It's in the Criterion Collection, of course. And the film was adapted into an opera by Austrian composer Olga Neuwirth in 2003. Very cool, very cool. I give Lost Highway the Nick pick. Lost Highway is a Lynch film in every sense of the word. It feels like a pivotal moment in David Lynch's film portfolio, hinging between the two major ideas behind Twin Peaks and Mulholland Drive. While this film in itself is still an artistic achievement, to me it feels more rigid and unapproachable than even some of his most abstract work. The narrative is indeed incoherent, some of the musical choices feel dated and jarring, and it feels harsh to audiences rather than inviting. Not that it has to be inviting, though. It's a tough nut to crack, but somehow for me, this time only, its founding ideas still shine through. Lost Highway paints a picture of dissociation, sex, violence, reality, and fantasy that are all muddled, impactful, nonsense, and bone-chilling. Like I said, it's Lynch in every sense, and I love it. Everyone, thank you so much for joining me in this episode of Lynchian Picks on Coffee Nick's Movie Picks. I'm so happy to be back. Once again, that just recording that really just scratched like an itch in my brain. Maybe it was just nonsense, but also this film is nonsense. So I had a lot of fun discussing this with you guys, and I want to hear what you all think about this movie or any of Lynch's films. So if you would like, please write to me on social media. My Instagram handle is at coffeenicksmoviepicks, or you can email me at coffeenicksmoviepicks@gmail.com if you want to write like a full essay that I can read on the podcast. The whole point of these films is to discuss with other people. It's not to explain it and like have a definitive truth about it. It's to share ideas and connect about it, much like all films. So please do that. Please write in and let me know. And stay up to date on the show by following on social media. There's links down there for that. There's also all sorts of other like little goodies down in the show description, so check that out. Thank you so much for listening. The next part of Lynchian Picks is part 8, and we're going to be covering the straight story, which I have never seen before. I am really excited, and that is quite the unique gem in Lynch's portfolio. So I'm excited to talk about that. I'm also like a little bit nervous to watch it because it's like the last big Lynch project I have yet to see. So after that, I'm like, what now? What now? But gotta do it. And I trust that I'll be watching it at the right time and it'll, connect with me. So we'll see. Excited to talk about it. I will see you guys next time. Thanks again for listening. Share the show with your friends. Bye.